Some Vikings were not just warriors. They were the reason entire villages simply disappeared from the map. And the strangest part? Not all of them were the same. Most people imagine a Viking as a single type, that brutal man who arrives by sea, raids, kills, and conquers. But that's just the surface. Because behind that image, there was an entire society, a structure, a hierarchy, a logic of power. And within it, there were men who fought, men who commanded, men who sustained everything, people who guided decisions without ever wielding a sword, and figures so violent they were feared even by other Vikings. Now, think about this with me. When we say Viking, who exactly are we talking about? The warrior, the chief, the explorer, the slave, the free man, the mystic, or the one who seemed to have completely abandoned his own humanity? Because the last one I'm going to show you was not just a warrior, it was something far beyond that. When you think of a Viking, this is the guy you're thinking of. The warrior, the invader, the man who arrives by sea and changes everything. These were the warriors who turned the Vikings into legend and into a nightmare. They were responsible for the attack expeditions that marked history. Men trained to sail for days, sometimes weeks, until they found completely unprepared coastal villages. And when they arrived, the attack was fast, brutal, and almost always without warning. Now, imagine this scene. You're living a normal day, a small village, a common routine, and suddenly ships appear on the horizon. No negotiation, no announcement, no chance to prepare. Just the sound of water, the impact on the sand, and then chaos. Maybe that's exactly what made the Viking warriors such a fascinating figure. It wasn't just strength, it was psychological impact. Fear arrived before they did. These men didn't fight only for survival. They fought for honor, for reputation, for status, and of course, for plunder. Anything of value could disappear in a matter of hours. Gold, silver, food, animals, rare objects, and often people. But there's one detail many people ignore. Not every Viking was this man. In fact, this was just one role within a much larger structure. Because while the warrior entered battle, there were other Vikings controlling everything behind the scenes. And some of them almost never needed to fight. The next level didn't fight for orders. He gave the orders. Jarl. If the warrior was chaos, the Jarl was control. Within Norse society, this was the man at the top, the leader, the landowner, the one who concentrated wealth, influence, and authority. Jarls didn't need to be on the front lines all the time, but they were the ones who decided who would go to war and who might never return. Now, think about this. How many battles does a man fight because he wants to, and how many because someone told him to? This is the kind of power that rarely appears first, but it's what truly moves everything. Jarls commanded expeditions, chose targets, defined alliances, distributed wealth, and controlled what happened after the raid. And here's the point most people don't realize. Real power was never just in the sword. It was in the decision. While the warrior risked his body, the Jarl multiplied power. More land, more alliances, more men under his command, more influence over the community. Personally, I think this is where the hierarchy truly becomes dangerous, because it stops being just about strength, and it becomes about controlling people. And control builds empires. But not all Vikings wanted to command. Some wanted something different, something beyond war, and even beyond power. They wanted to go further than anyone had ever gone. And that's where the explorers come in. Explorer. If the warrior sought conquest, the explorer sought the unknown. These men didn't just leave to attack, they many times left without truly knowing if they would ever return. Open sea, cold, fog, unpredictable currents, no precise map, no guarantee of land, no certainty that the horizon held anything but death. Just direction and courage. These were the men who pushed the Norse world far beyond what most people imagine. Iceland, Greenland, and even lands in North America fell within the reach of these journeys. Now, stop and think about that for a second. In a time when many people never left the place they were born, these men crossed oceans. That's not just courage, that's obsession. But here's an important part. The Viking explorer was not an innocent traveler. He could negotiate, he could observe, he could settle, and if he encountered resistance, he could also attack. That may be the most unsettling detail. You never knew if they were arriving as visitors or invaders. And maybe that's exactly what made them so unpredictable. But even these men who crossed seas and pushed the limits of the known world weren't always the ones who accumulated the most power. Because while some risked themselves in unknown waters, others were focused on something far more strategic, something that in the end defined who truly became rich. Merchant, or in many cases, the man who knew how to turn violence into wealth. Because it wasn't just about taking everything. It wasn't just about invading and grabbing whatever you could. There was method, there was calculation, there was intelligence. These Vikings understood value. They knew what was worth carrying, what could be traded later, what had utility, what created prestige, and what seemed insignificant but could generate alliances, protection, or influence. Silver, jewelry, weapons, textiles, rare objects, luxury items. Everything was analyzed. Nothing truly important was random. Now, think about this. A warrior can win a battle, but the one who understands value wins after it. These men took the result of violence and converted it into economic power. And that changed everything. Because wealth buys alliances, buys ships, buys men, buys protection, buys position. Personally, I think this is one of the most underestimated roles when we talk about Vikings. Because without this kind of mind, plunder doesn't become legacy, it becomes just destruction. But with strategy, it becomes expansion, it becomes influence, it becomes permanence. But here's the curious point in all of this. Not every Viking fought, not every Viking traveled, not every Viking raided. In fact, most of them didn't live like that. And this is where the common view of Vikings completely breaks down. Karl, the free man. This was by far the most common type within Viking society, and maybe the most ignored of all. Because when we think of Vikings, we almost never think about the man who is planting,
building, repairing tools, raising children, taking care of the land, trying to survive the winter. But that's exactly what most of them did. The Karls formed the free base of society and included farmers, craftsmen, and other workers who sustained the functioning of the Norse world. Now, think about this. Without food, without iron, without wood, without ships, without tools, without houses, how long does a warrior survive? Nothing. Everything the Vikings achieved depended directly on these men. They weren't in the center of legends. They weren't the face of terror coming from the sea. They weren't the names remembered in sagas, but they